Kiir has wrapped up high-level talks in Pretoria with his South African counterpart, Cyril Ramaphosa, as the world's youngest nation edges towards its first-ever elections since independence. South Africa chairs the African Union's committee overseeing South Sudan's 2018 peace agreement, and this visit focused on the country's preparations for a vote now scheduled for the 22nd of December. But the run-up to those elections has been anything but smooth. South Sudan's parliament recently voted to remove two key safeguards, a national census and a permanent constitution that were meant to happen before any voting took place. Well, meanwhile, the country's first vice president and main opposition figure, Riek Machar, remains under house arrest, facing treason charges, and fighting has flared again in parts of the country. Well, to help us get a little bit more understanding of what's really at stake, we're now joined by Daniel Akech Thiong, who's a senior analyst on South Sudan at the International Crisis Group. Daniel, thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So why does this meeting between President Kiir and President Ramaphosa in Pretoria actually matter beyond the normal diplomatic language?
Well, President Salva Kiir was in Pretoria seeking regional political validations. President Cyril Ramaphosa chairs the African Union's high-level committee on South Sudan, and with election a few months away, Juba needs the African Union either to validate its current electoral trajectory or to provide political cover and broker consensus if a negotiated delay becomes inevitable.
So South Sudan's parliament has now removed the requirement for a census and a permanent constitution before this election. Supporters say that this, in many ways, clears the way for a vote to happen on time. What's your assessment for this development? Some might say it's not helping, even though the elections might happen on time.
There is a massive readiness deficit within the political system in South Sudan. The ground reality includes legal challenges, one of which is being addressed in a very unilateral manner that actually could affect the existing political frameworks, which is the 2018 peace agreement. So it's not really helping to close the gap because the political class in South Sudan are divided. There is an ongoing war since late December last year, which is still raging, and the government has not been able to address that. They have a capacity to actually stop that violence, and also the parties internally, the party of the president, which is just a faction of the ruling liberation movement that fractured during the civil war in 2013 into many parties. These are not working together. So the manner in which this for holding elections were removed is just one of the problems. Even if it's addressed either way, it will not be the only deficits that they have to deal with. The security, people are displaced, people are dying, people are in need of food, there is a fiscal crisis happening. So all of this together is making it a bit challenging for one factions to try to remove a few adults here and there. So, and also it's really critical that the question is not whether South Sudanese want to vote, but whether the institutional architecture can survive an elections. Critical benchmarks of the 2018 peace deal remain unfulfilled. The army is not unified, so there are multiple armies. Everyone is a commander-in-chief in their own cocoon, and civic space is severely restricted. The first vice president, as you just mentioned, remains sidelined under house arrest, and this represents the biggest opposition party in the country. The party Machar is leading. So rushing into sort of like a unilateral election risk unraveling the peace architecture entirely, and we could be seeing the country back to war.
Let's talk a little bit about Riek Machar. I mean, the largest opposition party. Can there really be a credible election when the leader of the country's largest opposition party is sidelined in the way that he has?
No, it's not possible. The elections was meant to be the final chapter for ending the war, to transition the country from the transitional arrangements into a democratic state. But with sidelining opposition leaders, it's making it difficult for his constituents, which is a large constituents, to participate. And that's part of what needs to be resolved before even rushing for elections, that South Sudan cannot work on a major political achievement by sidelining some people. The grassroots are also not going to be ready to exercise their rights because of an ongoing war, which is mainly fought in Machar strongholds in the Upper Nile regions, the three main states of unity states, Jonglei State and Upper Nile. These are the strongholds of Machar, and these are the areas where it will be very difficult to imagine people voting because of an active ongoing conflict.
So you mentioned fighting. I mean, it's flared up again in parts of Upper Nile and Jonglei. How real is the risk that this election, instead of bringing stability, could actually push South Sudan back into full-scale civil war?
The risk is real. The political division is not just like between Machar versus the faction the president is leading, the Sudan People Liberation Movement. The division is happening even in those factions. The party of the president has so many people who are outside of South Sudan currently. So it's not even a united factions. And if they were to go for election, at least they should try to man over their differences. And then the same in Machar, his party is also fragmented. So this fragmentation is making it nearly impossible for them to be able to really to arrest the ongoing conflicts that is happening in the two main states. But it's also, there is much insecurity not related to the national politics, but it's leading to a lot of suffering also in other states. So this is really a situation where it's a big risk that if they hold an elections, chances of the violence that is already happening being exacerbated, becoming more decentralized, with more and more different actors is very real. And that's something which is why outsiders, international community are not really backing the country to go there. They want these steps to be taken before taking this extra risk that would put the country back to war or exacerbate an ongoing war which is already happening.
Given everything that we've discussed so far, do you think it was the correct call by the African Union to back the 22nd of December as the election day and ruling out another postponement?
The decision was not really something that would lead to the desired outcome. There is a frustration of extension after extensions. The agreement had been extended 5 times, and it was very slow process to even form the government of national unity in 2020. So the African unions are struggling with which way do we go. So if you hold an elections, what are the consequences? If you don't hold an elections, another extension which would be hallowed like the previous ones will not be acceptable. So this is a very difficult situation, but I think the way out of this would be an inclusive dialogues with all the stakeholders, because there are multiple parties that were not party to the 2018 peace agreements who are now active in oppositions. So there is a need to work things out and come up with a more credible path toward elections with some kind of actionable benchmarks, so that you cannot just like push for elections when there are all this fragmentation. So that is something the African Union and the African Unions and Pretoria and the regional capitals should actually think of supporting the initiative that is led now by AU High Representative, former Tanzanian President Jakaya Kikwete, is leading an initiative which should bring everyone together, and the regional leaders have a power to actually create a forum for these inclusive dialogues, where election would be one of them, but there are questions of security, human rights issues that actually needs to be addressed, and also financial guardrails needs to be built. There is a question of financial accountability, which is making it difficult for the government to even meet the basic financial budget for the election. So far, it's only 20% of the budget that the electoral committee asked for. So the gap between holding an elections, what is needed to hold an elections is actually too wide, with the gap between what has been done and what needs to be done. So that is really something that needs to be, they have to go back and revise their work, the African Union in collaboration with the other groups that are working bilaterally with South Sudan.
Help us make sense of all of this. You know, when South Sudan got its independence, it seemed like everybody was on the same page. Were there hidden tensions that are playing out now that people should have paid attention to as far back as then? Because I'm looking at Libya. For as long as Gaddafi was the common enemy internally, everybody seemed to be coming together in common purpose. And then as soon as Gaddafi left, all hell broke loose, and now we're seeing this prolonged conflict in Libya. Is that the same scenario in South Sudan, that there were warning signs about what could happen that were ignored?
Definitely, this is really the states where rebels basically won through these secessions. We are facing a dilemma where what made them succeed during the insurgency are the very habits and characteristics that are making it difficult for the states to be built using the same logic. And I think that includes the internal issues that were actually addressed violently in the past needs actually negotiations now. So you cannot really operate in the same way they were actually operating in the past. And yes, the external enemy was always used to sort of like to hide the internal difficulties, the internal wrangling, and then that is something that the leaders should have addressed when they actually won the country. There is no political program where the ruling party that actually won the war, the liberation movement, did not sit down and say what kind of South Sudan they envision after separating from Sudan. And that's something they still have time. They could use the forums we are talking about to actually sit down and look back and say, like, what is it that we have achieved, and where do we want to take our country, regardless of which factions they belong to. That is really what explains what is going on wrong. This internal issue cannot just be resolved by sharing the cakes, which is what the agreements had been designed to do. It's bring them to the table, share power, but then what happens when the cake is finished? They go back to fighting. So there has to be something bigger in addressing the institutional architecture of the state that they won.
Daniel, we're going to have to leave it there. Let's hope that they do find each other eventually. But thanks so much indeed for your insights and analysis.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That was Daniel Akech Thiong, who's a senior analyst on South Sudan at the International Crisis Group, giving us update on the situation in South Sudan.
The sound of Africa, starting strong.